Again, I'm talking to Mychal Denzel Smith, writer for The Nation and Feministing. You can follow him on Twitter at Mychal Smith. Let's move on to a different piece that you wrote recently for The Nation. It's connected to this because all this stuff is really connected. I mean, the general gist is exploitation and whatnot. But so you actually wrote this piece on about how you sometimes tune out when the talk comes to income inequality, but the truth is the country's actually built on inequality. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I did a radio interview recently where they had on, I think his name is Matt Gillen, who just co-authored a report about how income inequality will lead the United States to become an oligarchy and not a democracy. And listening to him, like, but it's always been that way. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
American government is based on who is left out. Like, that's what American systems of governance and economy are all based on who is left out. And I think that it's a failure of people in the present to be ahistorical and not recognize that this is the structure of the United States from its inception. Like I said then, poor white men weren't even allowed to participate in the government until Andrew Jackson, for all his racist faults. They weren't even allowed. Like, it wasn't even poor white men. This has always been a country dedicated to the assurance that rich white men will remain rich white men. And such that the policies reflect that and have always reflected that. That piece was really prompted by a lot of the discussion around the new Thom Hartmann book, Capital in 21st Century, in which he's detailing the ways in which capitalism is naturally geared toward this inequality. Like, capitalism unchecked will produce this type of inequality. But everyone looks at that period in U.S. history or Western history where post-World War II, we experienced the greatest, the lowest levels of inequality, and looks at the destruction of wealth that happened during the war, but also the policies that were implemented during that time, and look at it as like the kind of golden era of economic prosperity, where, the 1950s, 1960s, where, the highest tax rate was something like 90% on wealth and what have you. There was investment in the public sector in the form of the building of highways, in the form of the GI Bill, in the form of the creation of the suburbs and things like that, like in low interest rates for housing loans and things, like all of these wonderful government programs. I mean, talk about everything that sprang up from the New Deal, or like Social Security, and then eventually food stamps and Medicaid and all of these great things, right? But what's not acknowledged enough is that so much of the reduction in inequality was built on another form of inequality and blatant racist discrimination against Black people. I mean, what we're talking about is a period in which, the GI Bill, Black soldiers could not come back from the war and benefit as much from the GI Bill as their white counterparts could, because the number of schools that they were allowed to attend on the basis of the GI Bill was not as great. Like, they couldn't attend the same quality of schools as their white counterparts could. Those low interest home loans to buy homes in these new suburban outlets were not available to them. I mean, there was actual policy to not sell those homes to Black people. It was actual policy that that your property values would go down if those homes were sold to Black people. I mean, we drew red lines on the map to delineate where Black people could live, and the homes that were available to them would depreciate in value. And then the highway system that made it possible for white people to move out of cities and go to these suburban homes and be able to travel back and forth. Some of them they actually were built on Black communities, like pushed Black people out of their homes and destroyed these communities in order to build the highways. Like that's actual history. So we're talking about the creation of the American middle class. Well, the creation of the American middle class is made possible through white supremacy and also patriarchy. I mean, these are not things that are available to women at this time. Like, the idea of the American nuclear family and the American breadwinning household and American middle class is the idea of the male provider getting a home for his family, for which the woman would tend to and would be locked out of economic opportunities and just a sense of self and self-definition. Like these are the ideas from which the American middle class is built. So we can't just look at this so-called golden period and whitewash over all of the things that made that those low levels of inequality possible. But then also we look at these economists are pointing to this moment where inequality starts to foster, like, splinter in American society, and we're experiencing these great levels of inequality over the past 30 or 40 years. And it's like they're located at the end of the 70s, the early 80s, Reagan era. But without saying that part of the reason for that is the backlash to the civil rights movement, to the women's liberation feminist movement that called for the inclusion of more people inside of the American dream, inside of that American prosperity that was being experienced. More people wanted access to it. And as they were getting the legal grounds to get access to it, there was that conservative, regressive backlash that prompted more policies that would ensure that only rich white men would have access to those programs, and the slashing of the safety net. I mean, we talk about like food stamps now. Food stamps, that program is started by the modern version of food stamps. It started by JFK when he visits Appalachia, like West Virginia, white poor people, and everyone's fine with it when it's going there. But when Ronald Reagan can craft the narrative of the welfare queen and make you think that it's black women that are benefiting or exploiting the food stamp program, then we need to cut it. Like that's the type of inequality that we need to be looking at in terms of that. It's not just an economic structure. Like economics that doesn't deal with the cultural and political is not as relevant to us if we can't parse out exactly why the inequality has happened.